Hey there. So I thought I'd make a video on the topic of what it's like to work between a sound designer and a musician or a composer on a game project, because that's something that often comes up as well, right? So basically, there are a couple considerations here, but the one from the starting point of a project, I would say, is like you should think about what the identity of your project is about and what it surrounds, right? Because if you want like a game with that has really powerful sound effects that are like really impactful, that's like one balance of the scale, so to speak. And then the other balance, if you were to tip it the other way, is that a game that's very heavy in music, right? And music is very loud in the mix and almost takes center stage. So you kind of want to decide, like, is this a game more about the sound effects and the voice, a game more about the music, or somewhere in the middle? And I say that's an important consideration because when you have a sound designer and a composer working together in tandem on a project, the thing you want to consider or think about is that if the music is very loud and full bodied, like almost like very like orchestral, or maybe even something along the lines of Doom, which Doom is actually Doom Eternal is a great example of a game that has that balance really nice. Music is actually quite present in Doom, possibly more so than some other projects, right? But it has the two in balance, right? In the old school days on films, like if you ever watch any documentaries of maybe like Star Wars, for example, you'll see John Williams and Ben Burtt sitting in the mix room at the very end of the project with the director, and then the two of them coming to an agreement about like what points in the scene or the film the music takes center stage, and what points music takes a back seat to sound effects. There are moments where like music is completely omitted for music. Music is completely omitted for sound, and then vice versa, right? And so that's like an important consideration for a game project too. So oftentimes, right, if you need a mood piece for a like a traversable or explorable world or map, right? It would make more sense that the balance of that is probably tipped in the direction of being more ambient and more like background, so that like any sound effects that have a lot of bass and have a lot of punch can like kick through like a weapon or a Foley action, right? Whereas if it's like a very tense moment of your game where like it's very emotional and you're trying to build the momentum, like I always think of Mass Effect when it comes to this. Like they have like a very rousing, very like fast paced music and like background. It's like a high tempo, and it strikes that balance again of trying to remain innocuous but also trying to remain present and like amp the mood up, right? So that those are all important considerations to have, because a lot of times you almost think that a good score is one that doesn't necessarily like hit you in the face, but at the same time it's poignant, or like it has the right moments when it knows to like step up, right? So I mean, you could have moments where there's no sound effects either, and it's just music, and then you can use moments like that to actually bump up the volume of your sound mix versus your music mix. Now, where this comes into consideration in the indie realm is that when you're hiring a composer to do either composition and implementation work, and a sound designer to do sound design and implementation work, you want the two to work together on this, right? Like they should maybe like confer at the beginning of a project, or somewhere toward the beginning stages, where they can talk about the sound versus the music style, and sort of like which moments take precedence over which, depending on the complexity and depth of the game, right? Music can be interactive too. It can change a lot. Like it can, like certain gameplay triggers obviously will make music changes happen, which is like a way to make it interactive, make it cool. But at the end of the day, you want to think about your master mix too, and that's usually something that the sound designer like myself would be actually in control of, like the overall final output volume and levels. It's just that you want to make sure that those two things are in balance, so that you don't ever run into a situation in your game where you have great music, you have great sound, but the music is constantly overpowering the sound and like muddying up the mix, right? Like that this doesn't even come down to just to mixing it, like once you're actually at that stage of your game project, but literally from the creation stage, right? It's like, do I want a soundtrack that's like very full bodied with tons of bass, lots of mids, lots of drums going on, that's going to conflict with like low end gunfire or like high end like sizzling sounds or whatever the case may be, right? Like you can think about the frequency bandwidth and ranges from the starting point. This is just like a little anecdote, but I remember reading an article about the sound and music balance of, I think it was one of the Metroid Prime titles, which is like an inspirational game for me. So in Metroid, if I am not mistaken, I believe that the music was supposed to occupy mostly the low end and high end ranges of the frequency spectrum. So if you think of like a smiley face EQ, that's kind of like what the music was doing. It would fill in the low end and then the high end, and then you had this like good pocket in the middle for all the sound effects to occupy the mid range, right? So that's like something to consider, right? Like obviously that's pretty extreme for most modern examples or games. Like most music wants to be pretty full range, and the same of sounds. But yeah, these are all things to consider, right? Like there might be moments where your music can take center stage. There might be moments where it should be muted out entirely. Like yeah, that's kind of my overall consideration on it, and like how you can tackle these things smartly and in a way that will result in like the most powerful sounding audio mix if you want a game that is like very full with content of music, sound effects, and VO. Thanks for listening, and have a great one.